the magic trick of Narcos. It's taking situations you already know the outcome of and somehow making you freak out, making you think that there's any other alternative, and then crushing your spirits when you find out there is no other alternative. It's just brilliant, man. I love it.
Now let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of this week's show. It's going to be Narcos. We are doing a full deep dive spoiler conversation. Let's go ahead and play the trailer one more time for people who don't know the war on the drug, the drug war. All right, man. That was Narcos. So, people, I'm really excited about this conversation because this is a show, man. I was telling Christian, I know it's very, very bold to say, but could Narcos be considered one of the greatest shows of all time? You're going to find out here in a second. Christian, you know, as I begin this conversation, let me just say there's nothing more sweet and beautiful than hearing this song in the background, because there's something about Narcos when I hear it. The tone is set. I know what I'm about to watch. So, Christian, let me ask you. We're not in Colombia. We're not doing cocaine anymore. We flew over to Mexico. We're talking about weed. How did this show now deliver with the previous seasons on Narcos?
Okay, so the short answer is I think it's one of the best, but not season 3 great. But that's not a detriment, man, because this was really, really wonderful. There was something that you thought there might be a problem with the lower stakes of like weed, but then you quickly find out that that's not the focus of the season, right? That this is going to be about how Mexico ended up in the cocaine trade to begin with. But more importantly, this is essentially an origin story to everything, to the reason that America is even involved in the war on drugs and why we ramped up and escalated our involvement. Dude, I kind of loved it. I thought it was great. Of course, you don't have the magnetic performance or the like larger than life personality of like a Pablo Escobar. So that, you don't, without having that crutch, dude, you have to have a much more compelling story, just like they needed for season 3. And they did that. Like, they put it on Front Street. The very first episode tells you, hey, this is not a happy ending. Like, we find out that we know how Kiki Camarena's story ends, and yet they're able to make it this really dramatic thing.
In the last 2 episodes, we're trying to track this guy down. We know what happened with Kiki. Hell, the narrator even tells us in the beginning, and for some reason, as the audience, right, I'm thinking, it's okay. Something's going to come out of it, right? And I think towards the tail end of episode 8 or even 7, and you know, there's a part where one of his coworkers, right, Kiki, just like, I got this weird hunch, and I don't know if it's the universe talking, but I think I'm glad I'm leaving right now, you know? And I swear it's like a wink and nod to us, you know, to the audience members, because we know what's about to happen. And a show like Narcos, man, you're right. It's crazy thinking, where the hell do we go after Pablo? And then we get the Cali brothers, amazing. You know, where do we go with this? And you might even say, although this could be a somewhat soft reboot and quote-unquote origin stories on kind of like the beginning of it all, I mean, this show just hits its stride with each season. And I think that's what I'm just most impressed about is just kind of how good it goes on progressively as we get deeper and deeper into the story that we already know the outcome of, you know, and there's something really great with Diego Luna and Michael Pena. I didn't think, you know, they could fill in the spots of Pedro Pascal's and even the antagonist of the series, right, of Pablo Escobar and the Cali brothers. But each into their own, they find their roles, and what happens with Diego Luna towards the end, where how he goes into this position into, you know, a timid mob boss trying to just see the potential and what, you know, the drug trade could become in Mexico, to where he ends, I think it's absolutely flawless.
Right.
What do you think about Diego Luna?
Let's do some table setting, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll kind of get into specifics. So again, in the first season of Narcos OG, Pablo Escobar Narcos, they mention this character, Kiki Camarena. They call him the Jesus of the DEA. His death, he died for us all, is what the quote was. All right. So this is essentially that story. And I think the trailers kind of made you feel like we were going to see Diego Luna and Michael Pena's characters kind of be parallel stories that eventually intertwine, right? Biggest surprise was that they don't really meet during the series, right? There's very little confrontation between the two of them, which I was really, you know, surprised by. And also really surprised that, you know, Miguel is kind of an okay guy. I mean, yeah, he's a fucking drug trafficker, don't get me wrong, but mostly like a really reasonable dude. Doesn't seem like he's prone to violence the way that Pablo was, right?
No, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that kind of surprises me is, again, I'm like, oh, Diego Luna's the villain of this show. And it doesn't even necessarily start off that way, too. You know, we kind of see him. It's like, okay, he used to be a cop from, you know, one of the, what was the place called? Palacio or no, Simaloa, right? Something like that. And we just kind of see him slowly fall into this role where he's like, hey, you know, we're doing okay with the weed business where we're at, but we can potentially make it better or make the plant seedless, which again now in case, you know, turns into more profits because there's less packaging and all that stuff. And then here we are beginning our adventures here, right? And then, you know, we have the supporting cast, Don Nieto, you know, Rafa, right, from their quote unquote humble beginnings to where their characters kind of go into perspectives is it's kind of crazy. And of course, just like in any you know, I feel like show or story about drugs, you're only as good as your weakest link. And of course, what happens when egos end up clashing, right? When you start from a rag story to riches to something that happens overnight like that, people get cocky, people get arrogant, people make stupid ass mistakes. And man, there's a lot of that in here that you just absolutely love to digest and enjoy. But at the same time, while I'm watching it, I'm like, Rafa, you dumb motherfucker. I'm like, what did you just do? You know, and it's funny because, again, I'm already supposed to be rooting for Michael Pena, but when I just see Diego Luna deal with the idiocracies of his posse, right, it gets a little annoying, but it's also enjoyable to watch. How did you feel about the supporting cast when you were watching this?
Yeah, man. I mean, I loved it because I think there are parallel stories here. I think the same criticisms that you can throw at Rafa, you can throw at Miguel, right? Because the idea is that Rafa doesn't seem to get the bigger picture and that he's going to be fine. Like, weed is not what it is. Like, cocaine will do so much more, 10 times as much, right? But at the same time, it's like, Miguel, you were fine. You were a rich man with weed. Like, why did you have to do this? It's a thing about ego, right? It's about flying too close to the sun. And it's really interesting that, like, in a lot of ways, this should be a cautionary story. Like, Pablo Escobar's story is a story about someone who did fly too close to the sun and then was fucked over. This is a story about a guy, like, spoiler alert, he goes through all these trials and tribulations. His two partners end up fucked, but he perseveres, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't get to learn the lesson of, like, oh, I flew too close to the sun and my wax wings melted. Nah, dude, at the end, he's in the catbird seat. Fucking Kiki Camarena's dead. The other two took the fall for him. He's now connected with all the government. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's really sad because it's an examination of both of those inner circles. Having said that, between Rafa and Don Neto's the fucking best, dude, because he's every uncle that I have back in Puerto Rico right now. Like, dude. Isn't he like so grandfatherly and warm, but at the same time a fucking pendejo, like a fucking douchebag, man? I don't understand. But you love him. I loved every minute he was on screen, man.
No, absolutely. And that's why I laugh at this, because I'm like, God, man, I got so many uncles who just resembled this guy from the mannerisms, from head to toe, the look, the style. And you know what? Maybe that's why I'm loving the show a little bit more, right? Because
the alcoholism.
The alcoholism and all that stuff. You know, let's go ahead and talk about some other people. So, you know, we see someone like Isabella, and again, in this settings in the 1980s, right, where things are maybe not as progressive enough, right, or just kind of the origins of everything. We see here that Isabella, she's trying to stand on her own 2 feet. She kind of brokers a deal between, Michael Pena's character and then the eventual characters we'll get to in a second. But she stands firm and she stands tall with where she's at. And I kind of like what happens with her character. It's kind of unfortunate what happens with her character. But I like how, you know, she was able to stand on her own feet. And unlike, you know, the previous maybe female, I don't want to say protagonist characters in the previous seasons where it's like, hey, I use sex to kind of get where I'm at. She's like, no, I'm good at what I do because I'm just a bad bitch.
I thought she was a great character. I wish we would have got a little bit more. You asked earlier today in the beginning of this segment, is Narcos approaching one of the best shows of all time? We argued about it for a little bit. I said no. I said it's great. Don't get me wrong. I think it's one of the greatest crime shows ever made. But we need those little moments, right? We need like the Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad, the Sopranos. like, yeah, they have their overarching plots, but it's not about that. It's these small fucking moments that let you know who those characters are, right? Now, having said that, this season definitely started to trend that way. And one of my favorite scenes was Don Neto's son gets killed in some stupid fucking thing, and his friend accidentally shoots him. And so Don Neto visits him, and the guy thinks he's going to be killed, but he's there to forgive him. He's like, my son would want me to forgive you. I'm not going to kill you. And he fucking goes to the car, and the guy, you see it on his body language. He's like so relieved and so sorry. And he generally fucking loved Don Neto's son, right? Don Neto gives him the car, and he's like, my son would want me to forgive him, but I would not forgive myself if I let that man live. And he has his fucking homie go kill the guy. Little moments like that are what start to bring the series closer to that goal of best ever. Isabella's story was something that I thought was really, really good, but I wanted more. I wanted something that showed, other than her being scorned by Diego Luna's character or brokering a deal, give me something in the quieter moments that lets me see why she's this way. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you one thing. It seems like they're absolutely setting her up to do other things.
So something interesting we talked about last week, and I want to bring over into this week's video when we go deep into it all, is it's funny looking at it now, where despite what you think of marijuana today, people, back in the 1980s, marijuana was just as a threat and just as dangerous as cocaine. Did you find it more exciting, or was it just not as exciting because, well, crazier shit happens when people do cocaine, as we've seen in previous seasons of this show?
As fucked up as it sounds, when you see this kind of senseless violence over cocaine, you're like, well, it's worth a lot of money. I understand it. Like, when you see it with weed, it's a little bit harder to swallow, as fucking terrible as that sounds, because all the violence is senseless and it shouldn't be happening, right? Mm-hmm. But, I think that's what's smart about this season. It shows you how Mexico itself got involved. There was that part where they're talking about, if you smoked weed in the summer of 73, there's a good chance it came from this town. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, that's super interesting. Mm-hmm. It showed how Mexico got their foot in the door. But this season isn't about weed, and I think they quickly dispel of that rumor, They quickly kind of jump into the Colombian cocaine trade. And that's actually what's great, because for me, the biggest heavy lifting that this season had to do was create a universe, like to make you feel like there was an actual universe out there. And episode 5, I think, is the goddamn crown jewel of the season, because
absolutely.
They were able to bring back Pablo, man. They were able to bring back the Cali Boys, and not in a distracting way. If they were there any more than they were, it probably would be distracting. But it's the idea that, these guys are out there, that the Mexicans absolutely collaborated with the Colombians in order to get this shit across borders and into the States. So you have to bring them back. To that end, fucking, what's his name? Wagner Mora, the guy who plays Pablo Escobar, slipped right back into that role, man. Like, it was like, you knew it was coming. It's not like they surprised you, right? Like, they built it up for fucking 15 minutes in the episode. You see Blackie first, you see all the fucking henchmen and shit like that. And then, you hear Hippopotamus, right? You hear him fucking talk, and you're like, oh, shit. Like, Pablo's back.
Yeah.
And it became like the fucking MCU of Narcos. Suddenly you realize they all exist in this world. They can all come back. And I have never felt more sure that we will eventually see Peña again. Not Michael Peña, like our boy Peña from the first 3 seasons, because now it's just like, dude, you're fucking with time. People can come in and out. We're getting them back. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely. And you know what? God damn it. You took it from me, damn it. I wanted to say spoilers. But yeah, let's talk about the MCU episode of Narcos, right? Seeing the Cali brothers again, and man, I don't know. I felt like even the actors and the guy who played Pablo as well, I felt like they just had so much fun doing it. Like, just getting back into that world and just kind of seeing it unravel and seeing them again. I'm like, oh man, I miss you guys. I missed you. Pablo, I miss you. What up, buddy? How you doing, man? It's good catching up. And you're right. Even leading up to that introduction, man, Pablo, oh man, they're just something... And this isn't maybe it's a weird criticism to say, right? We know Diego Luna didn't do this to become essentially this drug lord, right? Maybe towards the end, that's where we see his character goes, right? But he's just shy and timid, and then even meeting Pablo for the first time. Again, spoilers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, in episode 5, seeing that interaction, right, of the 2 heavyweights, right? The guy from Mexico and the one from Colombia, right? Excluding the Cali brothers. This is at a point in the story or the overall narrative where this is Pablo's rise, right? And it's also skinny Pablo, as we've seen. Although I do like how he constantly was fixing the t-shirt, right?
Dude, little details, brother, little details. Him constantly adjusting him, like having the mannerisms of Pablo from earlier seasons, even though he's a skinnier guy, dude. Like, I don't know, man. That kind of acting is so just next level, man. And you're right. They all seem like they were having a blast. That scene in particular is just so well written, from the stupid jokes. Pablo doesn't like Mexicans, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the end, he's like, would you have really fed me to the hippopotamus?
To the hippo, like,
man, he doesn't like Mexicans either. And I just like fucking loved it. I mean, it was so like within the character. And also it's weird that Pablo, and again, I don't know why I'm saying this, he's a fucking killer, but he has this weird sense of honor that you can almost abide by, right? Because he sits him down and he's like, listen, man, I believe honesty is always the best with my enemies and with my friends. So I'm going to ask you one time, you tell me, why are you in Colombia? And this is a situation where, you know, Miguel is smart enough to know, like, I ain't going to lie my way out of this one. I got to just hope that this guy doesn't kill me, you know? Mm-hmm. And you know he's not going to die. But again, this is the magic trick of Narcos. It's taking situations you already know the outcome of and somehow making you freak out, making you think that there's any other alternative, and then crushing your spirits when you find out there is no other alternative. It's just brilliant, man. I love it.
Yeah, you know, let's go ahead and talk about Michael Pena's character, man, Kiki, right? So him passing away and just kind of seeing his body towards the later episodes. It was episode 9 or 10. A little hard to digest, right? And again, we knew from the narrative perspective and just kind of the story what we were going to get, but it still doesn't make it any prettier, right? Seeing it unravel and where it goes, because you know, I think one of the things that makes the show interesting, or why I was just so wrapped into it, is how does Michael Pena's character and just kind of the people he worked with in the DEA, they even say it too. This was also at a time where the DEA, sure, they were important, right? But not as important as the FBI, CIA, you know, like all those other ranks in the government, right? Like no one took them seriously. So not only are they dealing with like them being a joke of the lowest of the ranks, right, in America forces, but now they're dealing with the beginnings or just the unchangeable corruption happening all throughout Mexico. And you see his frustrations time and time again, where you're like, how the fuck does he get out of this? You know, and I didn't know. And that's what made it so exciting for me as I kept on watching it. It just, man, every time I felt like they won, it was 2 steps back, right? Because no matter how high you go about like, we're just and we're doing this for the good reasons, that dollar bill, y'all, is always paying someone to shut up or turn the other way. And I think the show did that again. And it's kind of scary, right? Because this is a story, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not over. It's still going on today, you know, and seeing the origins, and maybe it might be a little uneasy for people to watch. I think it's definitely something fascinating if you're into this type of show and drama and all that. But this is something very watchable, or definitely recommended for me. Christian, I can't praise it enough. Is there any last second thoughts you want to say with this?
Yeah, I want to say a couple things, which is we had a narrator this whole season that did not reveal themselves. It kind of sounded like our boy Murphy from the first 2 seasons, but it wasn't. You find out in the very, very, very end of the episode that it's this guy that you hadn't seen, but they show him. It's by actor Scoot McNairy, who was in *Halt and Catch Fire*. He's in 12 Years a Slave. He's a really good actor. But I liked that ending for a couple of reasons, because let's assume that this gets renewed. Okay, this is the next guy in, right? This is going to be the protagonist of the next season. Now we kind of know what our emotional byline is, because, spoilers, Kiki ends up dead, but Diego Luna doesn't. Miguel's still fucking around. So you need to have someone that's like diametrically opposed to him. So that's one cool thing. But let's live in the possibility that this is the final season, right? I know that doesn't seem likely, but let's live in that world for a second. It's still a really poetic ending because it's the next guy up. It's the next futile attempt to stop something that is incorruptible and unchangeable. You know what I mean? And I think that that's like actually a really poetic, beautiful ending. The only reason that I think that there's a chance that this might not get picked up, hear me out, is Netflix has been purging things that they don't own. All right. They've already canceled the Marvel things, which you figured like are pretty big, at least a couple of them. They don't own Narcos. Gaumont does. That's a French company. Now, they work with them as like exclusive distributors for their international content. but it's still something that they do not own. And because they don't own that, I think there is way more likely of a chance that Narcos does get canceled, because obviously there has been a shift in like strategy and dynamics over at Netflix. They want to own everything 100% outright. And then you also have Diego Luna doing this Rogue One shit, so you don't know what his schedule is. Yeah. And I'm just saying, there's a real possibility we may not get this as a follow-up. You know what I mean? And we need to be prepared for that.
I do like, again, and I mentioned it earlier, the supporting cast, right? Don Nieto and Rafa. There's something really beautiful towards the end of those shows, right? Or those the final episodes where we see them, where I think Don Nieto says something like, dude, you know, there's never a happy ending for people in this business, right? And, you know, when we kind of see his quote unquote demise, right? And Rafa, right? Where you think, oh, he's in Costa Rica, happily ever after with his girlfriend, right? Nope, he's gone. But before that, we see that conversations where he talks to Diego Luna's character, and he's like, you know, do you remember when we started? And there's something much more, I know it's a messed up situation, but there's something innocent when they go to those humble beginnings, looking at their origin stories to where they are out, where they become now, right? Diego Luna left his wife, you know, he became more power driven, right? Because if no one was doing this cocaine thing into Mexico, someone else was, you know. And then just kind of seeing Rafa just being happy that he had, you know, his beautiful plantation, right? Which was, you know, the size of a moon crater, right? That's how ridiculously big it was. And even Don Nieto, you know, kind of just chilling in the beachside, right? I'm sure he's hearing the gunfires while his men and the women, you know, surrounding him are already, you know, being taken down. And he's just looking at the ocean, because that's what he told Diego Luna. He's like, this is how I'm going to end, and this is how I want my story to end. And and again,
he really is my favorite character. There's that little moment between him and Miguel, which in the very beginning, like, Don Neto doesn't give a fuck about Miguel, but at the end, he's like, te quiero muchísimo, flaquito, right? Like, I love you, skinny. And you're like, God damn it. Like, it's such a fatherly figure moment, but he's also chastising him. He's just like, we didn't need to expand. Like, you needed to expand. Me and Rafa, we were fine. Look at our house. Look at our cars. Like, all of this is because of you. And it was just this really sad moment. And so little things like that, man, if the show can start focusing on little things like that, it's going to blow me away. I can't recommend it enough. Please go watch it. And maybe if the ratings are killer, like, Netflix will have no chance but to renew it. It has not been officially renewed, but if there's any show that deserves it, it is Narcos, man. Please go watch it.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, that was our full conversation, review / spoiler talk on Narcos. Go ahead and watch it.